Today we're kicking off a brand new series called Work Life, and here's what you know. I don't have to tell you this, but you spend a lot of time working, right? Most of us spend a lot of time working, whether you work outside the home or not. Like we all spend time working to some degree, and I love this stat. It's one of my favorite stats to talk about when we kick it off. But your working hours in life, right? The average American's working hours in life is about 90,000 hours, which is really nuts when you start to think about that. Like that is a lot of Big Bang Theory. You know what I mean? Like that's not 90,000 hours in life that you're going to spend time doing something. Now, what's so fascinating is they did a Gallup poll about 2 years ago. And one of the questions on the Gallup poll was about how often people feel unsatisfied or unsettled at the workplace. And one of the most fascinating, and I wouldn't have called this, one of the most fascinating parts of that poll, so that about 87% of Americans to some degree feel unsettled or unsatisfied at work, at least seasonally. Like there's sort of like longer seasons where we feel unsettled and unsatisfied. So what we're going to do over the course of this series, it's going to be so much fun. I think it's going to be fun. Today we're going to be talking about this a little bit, kind of unpacking it. Next week we're going to be talking about like the toxic workplace kind of stuff and power dynamics. And so if that interests you, which really kind of interests, I think, all of us, we'll be talking about that next week. And then the final week, we're going to talk about what it looks like to really work as a person who's a follower of Jesus, talking a little bit about the theology of this and how it comes about. But today we're going to talk about one sort of, I don't know, niche part of our work life. And that is this, that at some point along the way, you had a desire to work with purpose, right? Now, some of you still do. Some of you are like, you wake up every morning and you run to the office, you love it. It is maddening at times, but you work with purpose. But a lot of people don't. A lot of times you wake up in the morning and there are moments that you feel purpose, and then moments you're like, this is the same Excel spreadsheet I've been looking at for a long time, you know? Sometimes you feel purpose in one job and you take a new job. It's the same job at a different company, and somehow the purpose just gets sucked out of what you're doing. You're like, I don't really know why that is, but it just like disappears, right? And then some of you in the room, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you look at this and you're like, some of you look at work and you go like, I go to work and I do the thing, but the thing that I'm doing, and you actually like look at the most like irreducible minimum of it, and you go, at the end of the day, what I'm doing is X, and you look at whatever X is and you go, is that worth devoting my life to? Like, is that the thing that I'm really like doing? And sometimes people feel that, and they especially feel it when work's not going well, right? Now, what's hard is we could talk about your work purpose. We could talk about the things that you're creating and spending your time doing. But I deeply believe this. We just prayed this over every single child. And it's funny, it's easy to pray this over children. When we start talking about this as adults, most of us have grown to a point in our lives where we don't naturally apply what we're going to talk about today. And that's this, that the God of the universe has a unique purpose for you. This is one of the things that I think Christianity does separate itself from other religions in, is we don't believe in just a distant, disconnected God. We believe that God actually put you here for a reason, that God has a purpose for your life, and that he wants to fulfill that purpose through you. And then we've said this a lot over the course of the last several months in particular, when we say this, like, not only is that purpose like unique to you, but part of your life story is just discovering and experiencing the journey of seeing what that purpose actually is for you. Now, if we're going to rewind your life though, my gut says, and we talk about this sometimes, when you go all the way back to childhood, many of us had something where we like thought it was our purpose, and we dreamed about it. You daydream about it in class. Like you would sit in a class that was boring and you would daydream about doing that thing. Many people along the way, they have these like visions of what their life is going to be when it comes to purpose. And then what happens at some point along the way for most people is life happens and bumps up against that thing. And you experience a wound that you get very good at helping to like mask over and scar. But you don't do a great job of re-engaging with what was going on before you got the wound, right? Like some of you along the way, and I love talking to people about this thing in particular, but some of you along the way, you were convinced that you were very intelligent until somebody told you that you weren't, right? And it was somebody who publicly maybe shamed you or made you feel like you weren't smart enough or you weren't good enough. And then all of a sudden in the back of your mind, it just floats. And it creates a drive in you to prove something, right? The number of CEOs that I talk to is so funny. I love talking to people that are like executive leadership in particular, that have a deep insecurity around their own intelligence. It's so mind-blowing. People that you would never assume do. You're like, I don't know if I'm smart enough or I'm good enough to do the thing, if I'm capable enough to do the thing. And you experience a wound, and what it does is it takes the purpose that you have. It feels like it was bubbling up in you when you were younger, and it just almost squelches it. And for many people along the way, you changed your major in school, or maybe at some point along the way, you picked up a major that you thought your parents wanted you to do, or you picked up something along the way that this just makes sense. But in your quiet moments, right? In your quiet moments, when it's just you, that thing didn't die, it just floats somewhere in the back of your brain space, and it just exists. Right? It just exists. I put in my notes, I said it this way, that really for us, our greatest purpose often begins with a wound that we experience, and it breaks your heart towards something. It breaks your heart towards something. And when it gets broken, most of us have a path, and most of us kind of continually pick a path where we're going to either kind of mask it up, put it away, or we're actually going to engage with it. And so I have two questions I'm going to ask you. This is where we're going to spend kind of the foundational part of the series. And you may or may not have an answer to it right out the gate, and that's okay. The first question is this. What are you giving your life to that'll matter in 100 years? Right? What are you actually giving your life to that'll matter in 100 years? Now, you could come up with an answer to this and satisfy it quickly, and I know it. But for real though, what is it that you're doing right now that's going to matter 100 years from now? And it's probably not sitting in your job description. It's probably not. It's probably not the one statement at the top. And then it's probably involved in it somewhere. But what is the thing that you're giving your life to that'll matter in 100 years? The other one is this. What are you giving yourself to that actually feels like it's bigger than you? Now, the end of this series, I'll tell you where we're going, isn't that we wrap it up in a series and go, and now you find the perfect job, and here's the job fair that you match it all up with, and you never have to not enjoy work again, and that's not it. In fact, both of these two things, for the people who embody them the most, feel like self-sacrifice more times than not. The people who are giving their life to something that's going to matter 100 years from now, and people that are giving their life to a deep sense of purpose, at some sort of version along the way, what it does is it actually requires some level of self-sacrifice along the way. Now, what I want to also do is then go, hey, have you acknowledged whatever that wound is in you that caused you to stop dreaming big for whatever the future is, right? Do you know what it is, and do you actually bring it up sometimes and look at it, right? I put in my notes, said this, as long as we're committed, right? As long as we're committed to the path of least resistance when it comes to our purpose and where we're going in our lives, our wounds often just feel unkind. And the problem with our wounds feeling unkind, or the problem with our wounds just feeling like they're negative only, is that you miss what the New Testament in particular talks about, and this deep redemptive nature of the pain and wounds that you experience and feel, right? So today, I'm going to be really honest with you. We're going to go through these passages fairly quickly because most of us know it. But the area of the Bible we're going to look at today involves a guy that everybody knows, follower of Jesus or not. Most of us have heard of David. And it's hard to teach on this. Can I just complain for a second? I'll just complain to all of you. It's hard to teach on the story that I'm going to teach on because you know the ending already. You've seen pictures of this ever since you were a little kid. Some of you read your kid, this at night. You skip over the gory parts, but you still read it to them. You know what I mean? You look at the passage we're going to look at for the next few minutes. And I would just say, because of the nature of what we're talking about and your familiarity with it, the problem with this passage is that you can breeze by it and miss the humanity in it. And so for the next few minutes, what I'd love for you to do is just take a match and burn all of the cartoon images of this story that you have, right? I'd love for you to just, take a jackhammer. I don't even know what that is exactly. Is that this thing? Don't do that. Take an actual hammer. Yeah, do it. And just all the VHS tapes that you watched growing up about this, let's just do away with that. And what I want you to actually picture is an actual guy named David and an actual guy named Goliath. And he's a big old dude. And actually the relational dynamics that are happening in this. Now, the passage that we're going to look at really begins with a guy named Saul, who is king over this group of people. Really the first elected king in some ways that was put into place to lead this group of people. And there were parts of it that he led well. A lot of people don't talk about this. There were parts of it he led well. And then there was a whole swath of it that he led incredibly poorly, right? And so what happens is God says, hey, we're actually going to pick a new king, right? Somebody else is going to come along. And so it sends a prophet, right, to this family and says, out of this family is how we're going to pick the next king. And so it's always fascinating to look at this particular part of the story because I think it is actually so personal. So he sends him over, and here's what it says. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 16 at the beginning. Jesse, who's the father of all these guys, Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, who's the prophet. So the way that they lined it up, you can kind of just picture how we did this with the families. You just walk them all out. All the sons come out. Some of them are wearing a little bit, tighter shirts to show how strong they are. That's not true, but I made that up. They're coming out to impress the prophet guy to show like, here's what it is. And Jesse's bringing out his best, right? He's bringing out like, hey, here, obviously this one would be king. Obviously this one would be king. So he goes through. But Samuel said to him, and I love this, he says, no, the Lord has not chosen these. And then everybody's confused. I mean, can you just imagine this for a second? I think it's so funny. He shows up to your house, you bring out your kids, and he goes, look, you have anybody better? Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, anybody, any other? Got any secret kid? Like, there's a little bit of like, who are we not? I feel like I'm supposed to be here. What's going on? And he said, these are not the chosen ones. So he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you had? Now, I love this part of it. Can you imagine being one of the seven that's out there, one of the sons that's out there? And your brother's off somewhere else, and you're looking around, and you're probably flexing a little bit. I don't know, greased up. No, you're not. But you're doing this, or you're looking around. And you go like, it's not us. And you look at each other, and you're slightly like frustrated by this. I love the beauty of this narrative. Because Jesse's response is as surprised as anybody. He goes, well, they're still the youngest, right? And I love this part. And he's tending the sheep. Now, this is the part, at least where I grew up, and people tell this story. It's like, well, he's just tending the sheep, which feels like the most passive, boring thing in the world. Like, I don't tend sheep. To be honest, I think I've seen one sheep. Would you still say singular? South Carolina education. Yep, one sheep. Is it sheep multiple too? Wow. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Yeah, I'm just kidding. It's okay. But you look at this and you go, hey, like he's tending the sheep. This feels like a job that's just like, I don't know. You passed over that. Like, don't you have somebody that's doing more? But when in actuality, what he's doing is extraordinarily complicated. All right, I love this part of it, though. David was initially, right, rejected by his father as being worthy to be king, or even more specifically, if you're going to be more blunt, or being worthy to be the one who was chosen according to the purpose. And so the rest of this goes through, and he gets picked and all that, which is really, if you haven't read it, you should read it. It's really fascinating. But then a battle breaks out between the people that Saul was leading, this king, and this, and then a whole other group of people called the Philistines. And what's fascinating at the core of this battle isn't just two people or two groups of people disagreeing over something. It is actually a very religious kind of specific thing. Like there's actually this part of the narrative where you're going like, they're coming against God in the midst of whatever this battle thing is. And so for 40 straight days, this is again the part that's so fascinating, this Goliath guy is taunting the Israelites, not just about who they are, but about who their God is. And so there becomes this battle. This is when David gets involved. Most of you know the story, but here's what the writer says about what happens next. It says, early in the morning, David left the flock in the care of a shepherd. He loaded up and he set out as Jesse had directed, and he reached the camp. So if you can imagine, this massive sort of area, two camps. They haven't like engaged yet. Goliath just walks out and he taunts. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. And then it goes on, it says this. And then, if we can go next, Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. And David left his things with the keeper of supplies. And this is the part that I think is so fascinating. What David does in the midst of this is he doesn't mosey on up. David ran to the battle lines and then asked his brothers how they were, which is a fascinating part of the narrative. Like he's getting information. He's very, very intelligent. As you read through the life of David, he's so intelligent. And then you get through this, he runs to the people to check on what's going on and to get clarity about everything that's going on. And then as he runs up, this is so fascinating. As he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine, I love this. This is just the best job title ever, right? Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath. Doesn't that just feel awesome? I don't know what he championed, but champion from Gath stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance. And this is the part that's so fascinating. And David heard it. Like this is like origin story material from Marvel. You know what I mean? Like this is the moment when David hears it. And something happened in him, right? Now, what's fascinating that makes this feel like larger than life and disconnected from us is that you probably don't have giants shouting at you, and you're probably not at the front lines of whatever like a religious war kind of thing is. But there was a moment for David that was coming for him, whether he was looking for the moment or not. And every part of his past came to him, or came with him to this moment, right? The moment was brought to David, right? whether David was looking for that moment or not, and he steps into it and then really has a decision. Now, this is the part that I think is so fascinating. When you read the early life of David, right, this is the part that I think is so interesting and people forget. David had such a deep personal relationship with God that it wasn't that Goliath was just taunting. It was personal. It wasn't that it was just some like religious disagreement thing. It was so deeply personal for him. David's heart had been pre-broken before the moment ever came. And so it goes on and says, so whenever the Israelites, right, saw the man, they all had fled from him with great fear because, yeah. And so what David does is David then says to Saul, right, a few verses later, let no one lose heart on account, and I love this, I won't even say his name, on account of this Philistine. He says, your servant will go and will fight him. You know, this is where the Braveheart music comes in, you know what I mean? Like, and this is what's so funny to me about Saul. The king of these people looks at this young-ish young man and looks at the Goliath thing and goes, this is actually my best option. And you know what I think? And this is reading into it a little bit. But what I think is happening here is amongst all of the other people in the army and amongst all of the other options that he had that he could have sent out there, there was like a fire in this young man that gave him enough confidence to send him out. And so Saul replies and he says this. He says, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're the only young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But then he goes on and David says to him, like to cast vision around what this could be, he says, David says, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I love this. This is so easy to miss. Just pause. He's watching sheep, multiples, got it. And he goes, when a lion or a bear shows up, right? Anybody ever seen a lion in real life outside of the zoo? Of course you wouldn't. You've been eaten. You wouldn't be here right now. Yeah, right? It's not like, and then we hugged it out and he left. You know, that's not how that goes. Like I saw a bear one time in my whole life and it was like this big and I was like, I just wet my pants. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't getting near that. There's something about this, and it's so fascinating, where he was trained and developed and broken and shaped and built in private somewhere else. People talk about that part a lot. But he was ready for this because of the pain that he had experienced previously. That the wounds that he had from battle were preparing him for where he was headed next. And then he goes, look, when the off from a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it. I rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Like there's a little bit of that. Sorry, I was really trying hard not to do this, Anna. Where's Anna? I do miss this thing every time. Have any Karate Kid fans in the room? Where are my Karate Kids? Yeah. That's the only thing I do every time we talk about that. Yeah, that's great. Now, what I say in this moment is then they look around and they go, are we going to send him or are we not? But the thing for us is this, that David's wound empowers, not cripples, his next step into what his purpose is actually called to be. And so then he goes on, he says this, he says, your servant, he's killed both the lion and the bear. And then he goes like after him. So this uncircumcised Philistine, I feel like he's doing some of this, like Kendrick's in the back, you know what I mean? Like he's like ready to go. If you didn't get that joke, you probably didn't watch the Super Bowl. I don't know. Like he's about to get after it. You know what I mean? He's about to go. Uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied, again, it's where it's personal. He has defied the armies of the living God. And then he paints a picture. And he doesn't point it to his own strength. He doesn't even point it to his own wound. He points to the redemptive work of God in the story. And he says this. He goes on. He says, so the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand this Philistine. And for those people in the room who are followers of Jesus, this is the thing I wish, this is the thing that gets emasculated so much in the message of Christianity, is that you were never called to be sent into the world in your own strength. You were never called to be sent into whatever your own purpose is in your own strength. If it doesn't feel a little bit scary, then you're a little bit safe. If the only things that you swing at are things that you know that you can get, you just, how it says kindly, it won't be. You just stop believing in the infinite power of the God that has promised to be with you in some way. That doesn't mean he's going to give you everything you want. So it doesn't mean he's going to give it in your timing. But you don't stand there by yourself, you know? You ever see like the cheesy Christian memes sometimes that people post? You ever seen these? You know what I'm talking about? Anybody watch Narnia? You guys know the Narnia books? There was this meme that I thought was so funny that somebody shared, and it was like this guy standing there, but then like Aslan's behind him. And I'm like, that is the dumbest cheese, but yeah, kind of. You know what I mean? Like a little bit. Like if you actually believe that the God of the universe with infinite power and infinite strength, with infinite resources, were with you, what would you actually attempt? How scared would you actually be? How much would your wound inform whatever your next step or decision actually is? It wouldn't. Because when you pause long enough to go, I either believe this or I don't, and I'm going to move forward or I'm not. When you pause long enough to go, I am empowered not by myself, but by the God of the universe, then you go, there is more to this than this moment that's in front of me. But in my notes it said this, that David's strength is built through the trials of his past. And this is the part where you go, when you look at this, he had already pre-collected the stories of God's faithfulness. He had already pre-collected them. This isn't about a lion, it's not about a bear. It's that when I go where God sends me, I'm not alone. When I go to the next thing that God has sent me to and it comes to my purpose, I'm not by myself. When I take a step out that feels risky and I'm like, I'm not sure, it's not just about you. It's about the good that you're injecting in the world and the redemptive nature of what's happening through you and in you to go do what he's called you to do. And anything less than trusting him with that is a failure of faith. Because it has put you at the center and your strength at the center of what could and should be. And God never placed you at the center of your own story. In fact, this is one of the things that I think is so interesting about Christianity. Now, I say this all the time, kind of half joking and half not. If you're not a follower of Jesus, this is one of the things that upends all of it. Christianity doesn't put you at the center of your own story. It doesn't put your own happiness at the center of your own story. It doesn't put your own and then I did it at the center of your own story. It calls you to self-sacrificial love on behalf of your neighbor and on behalf of the world, empowered by God to move through it. And it doesn't say it's a perfect thing. Jesus' closest followers didn't walk into it going, look how well it went. That's not what happened to all of them. In fact, you serve a risen Savior. I say this all the time. That went to the cross, who embodied the full power, strength, and empowerment by God to do what the purpose of God was on your behalf, self-sacrificially. And so that is what I believe pushes this young man into front and center into this moment. And it goes on. And this is one of the most fascinating parts of the story. It's so fun to read, at least for me. You don't read this to your kids at night, but it is fun to read. So David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword and spear and javelin. And at this point, it's when his voice cracked. You know what I mean? You ever had one of those moments? No, that's just me. Okay. But I came against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And then he says it so clearly and so Braveheart-esque. He says this. He says, this day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Love you, sweethearts. Good night. Sleep well. This very day, I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and a whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. Sleep well. And you know what empowers him to say that? It's not blind youth. It's that I am clear on what's in front of me and what the purpose of this moment is, and I'll step out and go. So everybody likes to talk about the moment. This is kind of gory, and I get it. That's why we have kids' church, I guess, but he does the whatever. It's not this, but you get it. Obviously, I've never done it. And then Goliath dies, but this is the moment that, again, is gory and weird, but there's deep significance to it. And he does decapitate the giant. And this entire moment, is informed by the wounds that he had in private. The lions that he came across were an opportunity for him to be shaped and to be grown into the purpose that God would have for him later. The wound of not being chosen and looked over would be the same wounds that would empower him to move forward and go, I'm not chosen by man, I'm chosen by God to do this thing. And in all of David's imperfection, I would love, at some point we're just gonna do like a 64 weeks series on this. It'll probably be another church, y'all fire me, but I'd do that. I'd say what's so fascinating about David's story is that in all of his failures, all of his ups, all of his downs, there was a clear picture of what fueled all of it. And it was a deep-rooted faith and who was for him in all of it. So I'm going to say God has a purpose for you that's bigger than you. And if you struggle to believe that as soon as you read it, that is a faith question, not a God question. And somewhere along the way, if it didn't go right the way that you thought it should go right, and if a good God could, then a good God should do this thing or do it in this time. I struggle with that all the time. Do it in this time or make it happen. All that kind of stuff. No. That's a faith question. When you gave your life to Jesus, for those of you who are Christians, you didn't give your life to Jesus to go, and now I'm not going to hell. That's not the entirety of the story. You didn't give your life to Jesus to say, and now I'm going to be just a good and better person. That's a little bit irrelevant when you read the scriptures. You should be and you will be, and also that's not the end goal for you. It's that you get to some degree set on fire for a vision for your life that is bigger than your life, and you become a part of the redemptive story of the world. Which means when you walk into your workplace, whatever it is that you do is not just about the spreadsheet thing. It's not just about the work that you spend 40 hours doing. It's not just about the traveling. It's not just about your boss. It's not just about your good boss. It's not just about your bad boss. It's not just about your boss that doesn't even show up. It's not about those people. It's about what God is going to do in and through you, wherever he's placed you, to make a significant difference in the lives of the people that he's put around you. So I asked you 2 questions at the beginning. This is what we're going to pick up next week. First question is this: what are you giving your life to that's going to matter in 100 years? And I'll just tell you this. This is not like go out and make a whole life plan, though I think you should. This is about having a clear answer to the question, what lives beyond me? The second one is this: what are you giving yourself to that's bigger than you? Now, we talk about this in the context of work, but I would say this. Some of you in the room are like a stay-at-home parent. And one of my favorite ideas around this, which is so powerful, is the greatest significant thing you're going to do with your life is going to be the child that you're raising right now. All the other stuff is going to be great, but that's going to be the greatest significant thing you do with your life, and that is amazing. Some of you are leaders in the room, and I'll just tell you this, like, you lead, but you lead with a limp, and you think that's the thing that pulls you back. But that limp is the thing that God is going to use to actually cause you to do something extraordinary with your life. Some of you, you know this, you've been given something that feels like a vision for the future. That's all of the things that we're talking about. And it sits there. And everything about your circumstances tells you that we're not moving forward. It's not progressing. Therefore, God is unfaithful. And even harder for many of you, you hold that same vision so closely, so loosely, and you're holding it and you're going, I know where we're going, but I don't know what to do next. And you're experiencing wounds and pains left and right. Can I just tell you something? That is 100% the lion and the bear shaping and the breaking of you in all the best ways. People give up on faith a lot of times because of the circumstances they experience. And I think of all the reasons to give up on faith, that's the last one. Because that's where God is shaping you to do what he's called you to do. So I put in my notes and said this: there's no limit, right? There are no limits to how God can use a person who is fully submitted to him. And so if you're here and you're going like, I'm holding that thing and I don't know what to do with it, or I feel wounded and I'm not moving forward, I just tell you, hold on to that and go shape me however you want to shape me. I submit. I predetermine submission to follow you. Some of you, you're just timid or you're scared. You're just not courageous enough. Can I just tell you in that one, just to be really blunt? All right. Great, acknowledge that and then go, it has nothing to do with your courage in that moment either. The New Testament describes the Holy Spirit as a wind that almost blows in the sail of people that are submitted to the Father. And maybe the first thing that you do is not go, I'm going to muster up courage, but it's just that I'm going to set the sail. So I've never done that before either, but I'm going to set the sail and allow God to just take this where it goes. I'm open-handed, wherever you want to do, use me. And the last one is this. Some of you, you're just going, I just feel brokenhearted, and this whole thing is being shaped and reshaped. And it's not clear yet, but it's happening. And the most practical thing that you can do when God breaks your heart for the better is to write it down and take clear notes about what those things are over and over and over again. I'm gonna let you go in a second, but I'll say it. Now, one of the things about our church that's so fun, at least for me, is we've had all these different seasons of ups and downs and cool stuff happen. And somebody told me what I just told you about hey, I'm trying to get clarity about what this thing's gonna be. As I'm a journaler. Not everybody's a journaler. I assume everybody's a journaler, but we'll just pretend that you are for a second. And I would sit on my, we had this front porch area in Traverse City, and for about a month out of the year, I could sit on it. It was pretty great. It snowed the rest of the time, but outside of that, it was pretty great. And I would have all of these notes about, I can see there, I don't see any of this. And I'll just tell you, this is a person's example of this, right? Really? It's not your story, this is mine. But I would say I would write, and I get so much clarity about where it was going and no clarity about the middle, right? And I don't know how to say this. This is one of the weirdest things, and this happens, I think, for so many people, is when you do the prep work in private, the bears, the lions, the wounds, you face all the stuff, you get clarity around what that stuff is, figure out what the vision stuff is. Usually, for most people, it's not like a slow burn to it's not like an equal progression to where it goes. It's the breaking, and then all of a sudden Samuel shows up one day at your house. And I can tell you exactly where we were, where I had been praying about it for years and years, thinking about it, and we're sitting at a dinner table. And somebody said something that no one else knew about me and about what we were doing. No one else in the world knew, except for Emily. And it was in the most tangible way, God said, it's time, it's time. And from that moment, the next step of trusting him was throwing a rock in a little pool or lake or stream or something like that. And all of a sudden it just rippled through. It was everything started going so fast. And I'll just tell you, for many of you in the room, that season is going to come where you just go, it's time to move. And when that happens, I would say, just like I said, you go, I'm going to trust you in faith and let the ripples take me wherever they go. But I'm going to follow you wherever you send me. So what we're going to do to end our time is this. I'd love if you would close your eyes for a second, bow your heads. Here's what we're going to do. If you are in the room real fast and you go, hey, I'm going to ask you to respond. Everybody's got their head bowed, eyes closed. Nothing special about that. It's more of just a private sort of, so that somebody can respond. So if you would actually do that, that'd be great. If you're in the room and you go, hey, my wounds are apparent and I don't know what to do with them, and it feels like it's muted the things that God is calling me to do. I'd love for you just for a second, you just look at me, all right? I'd love for you just to look at me. I've got a wound or a series of wounds and they feel clear to me. I don't know how to move beyond it, but it feels like it's muted what I'm supposed to do. I'd love for you to look at me for a second. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's great. Close your eyes for a second. If you're in the room and you go, hey, I've got a thing that's in my heart, a clear vision for where I'm headed. And the entire middle section is so murky, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what faith looks like next. I'd love for you to do this for me. If that's you, I want you to look at me real fast. Hey, I have this vision thing. Yeah. I know God's calling me to it. Yeah. Yeah. It's great. Yeah. Okay. And then the last one is this, right? This is one for some of you in the room. You're really honest. You walked away from faith in your mind because you were hurt, or the wound was so big, or you stepped away from Christianity in general because you the circumstances felt more than what a good God should allow me to experience. And you viewed the lion and the bear stuff as an unfaithful God versus a God who was shaping and moving in and through you. And you're going, today, I just want to see that thing differently, and I'm not even sure how, but I know I need to see it differently. If that's you, I'd love for you to look at me just real fast. If that's you. Yeah. Okay. So, Father, you see us responding, and you see what you're doing in our hearts. And so here's what I'm going to ask you to do, Father, this week. God, if you're working in us on these things that we're holding so tightly, Father, I pray that you would heal us to the extent of those wounds, that we can move forward not just with peace, but that we can move forward with faith. And you would help us to see those things as opportunities in our lives. For the person in the room who's like, I feel like I have the courage to take whatever the step is. Can I just pray that in the most tangible way possible, even this week, you would help them to look for the ways that you're present, that you would show up in tangible ways that feel like they're unexplainable, and that if you're calling them to go ahead and step and move, that you would just make it clear to them, and that with all of their fear, that they would be reminded that you are limitless, both in your love and your capacity to do things on our behalf that we can never do. And then I pray for the person in the room who may have walked away from faith or deconstructed their faith because of a series of circumstances that felt unfair, and they probably were. It felt painful, and they probably were. Father, I pray that you would remind them in the midst of all of that you haven't called us to a life that's easy. In fact, we will struggle, but in the midst of it, you are present. And so, Father, I pray that whatever healing takes place for them would take place at the cracked door of their mind and their heart, where your presence is allowed to be ushered in and to fuel their faith and shape their heart. And lastly, we just pray that there's a few hundred people in the room, that the extraordinary redemptive work that would come from the individuals here would be so powerful and be so that they would only be able to explain by your power and your might, and that it would inspire people in our city to turn towards you. We love you and thank you for that. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.